Things can get complicated quickly in the world of personal finance. From investing and budgeting to estate planning and insurance, there are multiple ways to accomplish what you need to get done. Let's take investing, for example. There are different strategies, including, but not limited to, passive index investing, value buying, the 3-fund portfolio, rental real estate, stock picking, target date funds, 70-30 splits. Honestly, I could rattle off 100 different options, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if you were overwhelmed by all of the choices. The more experience I get, the more I realize that simple is usually better. Although the word simple can mean different things to a lot of different people, at the heart of the meaning, it means something that is easily understood and easily done. So, how can we simplify money? Well, my friend Peter Lazaroff wrote a whole book about the topic called Making Money Simple, and he's on the show today to share some of those tips. In particular, we focus on investing and budgeting. On the investing side, we discuss why Peter chose to invest his personal portfolio into one index fund, although he has gained a ton of knowledge managing $6 billion of assets as the chief investment officer at PlanCorp. And if you hate tracking every dollar you spend, we discuss an alternative to traditional budgeting, the reverse budget, which is a simplified way to make sure your spending is aligned with your income. So if you want to spend less time managing your money and more time enjoying it, this is the episode for you. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the author of Making Money Simple and the host of the Long-Term Investor Podcast, Peter Lazaroff. You know those moments where you think, I wish I would have learned this in school? Those are the topics that we love to talk about. Join me each week as I interview experts sharing their strategies for solving problems that us young adults will face throughout our 20s and 30s. So what are you waiting for? If you want new episodes about adulting advice every Monday, hit that follow button. Well, Peter, excited to have you on the show. This is an interview that I've been looking forward to for quite a while. And I'm not going to say that we're going to cover the basics. I wouldn't really call it the basics, but I do want to call it simple. I want to talk about some of the simple yet impactful, needle-moving items whenever it comes to personal finance. And we were talking about this before recording, but there's something called Pareto's Principle, which essentially just says 80% of your results come from 20% of your actions. I want to focus on those 20% of actions, kind of the things that 20-somethings can do right now that almost feel bulletproof, or at least bulletproofing their finances for the future. Let's open it up with simplified investing. And I wasn't quite sure what your take was going to be on investing as a chief investment officer, but then I downloaded your guide at howpeterinvest.com, and I was really surprised to find that you invest in one fund. So tell me a little bit about why or what led you to make that decision, because I know that wasn't always the case for you.
It's something that I'm proud of, the degree of simplification within my own portfolio. It's a little bit like a chef eating their own cooking. And so I oversee roughly $7 billion as of this recording for clients all across the country. And there is a lot of work that goes into developing an investment philosophy, one, and then building a portfolio around that philosophy, two. And without getting into the nitty gritty of philosophy, it's keep costs low, it's be really diversified, it's don't try to predict the future, it's being mindful of taxes, stuff like that. And ultimately, what we do for clients, we could do in one fund, just like I do for myself, but people need this illusion of complexity. The stock market, the bond market, finances seem like a place of complexity. It's hard to sometimes wrap your head around the idea of the simplistic answer solving the complex problem. And so for me, there's a couple things. I had been an index investor in my 401k from when I graduated college in 2007, all up until when I joined PlanCorp in 2015. And by index investing, basically all I did was own the entire market. If people listening aren't familiar with index funds, it's the lowest cost, cheapest, most tax efficient way to get access to the total market. And there is literally nothing wrong with indexing. You will never, ever, ever hear me talk somebody out of indexing. Do I think you can improve upon indexing? I do. And, we can talk about that if you want, but it's really not that important and it's marginal. And I was coming to a firm that helps people implement some strategies that do try to improve on indexing. And I wanted it to be similar, but I also had a lot of experience maneuvering my portfolio at the wrong time. I've made literally every investment mistake that you read about in behavioral finance books. And this is someone who knows all the things. And what I felt like was the best thing for me when I was rolling over this pot of money, this 401k account that I'd been maxing out every year during a recession, worst recession since the Great Depression, and then a roaring bull market. And this is a big decision. And what I decided was I'm going to own one fund that is globally diversified, that is the appropriate mix of stocks and bonds for me at this point in time, which is 100% stocks for whatever that's worth, that is low cost, that has the same sort of overweights to portions of the market that our clients typically carry. And the biggest thing I was getting hung up on, honestly, was the fact that it was orders of magnitude more expensive than an index fund. An index portfolio is less than like 0.1%. At the time, I was willing to pay this one mutual fund over 0.3% to do this. And to me, that was sort of like a lot of the decision that people make when they hire an advisor. I thought, now I've made this decision. I'm going to maintain this until I'm 50, and then I'm going to add some bonds. Why? Again, we can get into that. Trying to stay out of the details too much. But ultimately, for me, now I don't have to make any decisions. I spent a lot of time making one really good, thoughtful decision. And now the key is just to stay the heck out of the way of compound interest, minimize investment mistakes. And for me, this was the path to do so.
Man, I'd love to roll the recording back and re-listen to that line again. But simply just spending time making one good decision so you don't have to spend time thinking about this decision over and over again, I do feel like is somewhat the power of this one fund portfolio, which I'm super impressed about. I did understand now why you might even pull that one fund apart into a couple of different funds, because whenever you're communicating that with your clients and when your clients are opening up their statement alone by themselves at the kitchen table and they see this fund is down or not trending the way you wanted to, although that's understandable, there are mechanics in each of those funds that might be averaging out, but it does kind of make sense now. It's like, okay, cool. We're going to do this 3-fund approach instead. This fund is kind of high growth and it should be around here. This fund is kind of steady and it should be here. And this fund is maybe somewhere in the middle. And now whenever they open up that statement, the combined average of all 3 of those funds might be the exact same thing as the one fund. But the fact that that was the discussion you had and that is what they're seeing on their statement totally makes sense for me from an advisor standpoint as well.
Well, and I think that one thing that people sometimes don't realize is that I'm going to use the example of making a lasagna. You can go buy a frozen lasagna in the freezer aisle at your grocery store. You can go to the part of the grocery store where they're making something fresh every day, or you can make it yourself and use premium ingredients. And yes, the premium homemade lasagna is going to be the best one. Do you always have to do all those different things? For me, I can eat frozen lasagna. That's all that matters. I also, if you go to howpeterinvest.com, the biggest question I always get is, well, what's the fund? Why don't we make them go to howpeterinvest.com? They can figure out what the fund is. You can also get a little more of the logic of why that fund versus maybe some others. But I think the key piece when people are choosing investments for themselves or evaluating the investments that someone has chosen for them, I don't think that more always equals more. Less doesn't always equal less. There are reasons for tax purposes, really it's purely tax purposes, that having multiple pieces that you can break out can be useful. But ultimately, simple investments are what you're going to be more likely to stick with when they're not doing the way that you want them to. And then the other thing is that it just ends up keeping costs a lot lower. There are fewer decisions to make. And just think about this. Like if we had to flip a coin and we have a 50-50 chance of predicting heads or tails, if you have to flip a coin twice and predict 50-50 twice in a row, your chances of doing that correctly are now 25%. And if you do it a third time, you're now down again to 12.5%. And every time you make decisions, you are increasing the probability of failure or decreasing the probability of success that you make the right series of decisions. And so investing is something that should be thought of as a multi-decade exercise. There are always crazy things going on in the world. And I feel like a great understanding of market history and market theory certainly help with arriving at something that you can stick with for multiple decades. But recognizing that you don't have to make a decision right this second. You don't want to put it off for years, but you can take your time and put as much time into that investment selection as at least as you would planning a vacation or buying a new refrigerator. I can't tell you how many crazy reviews I read about when we had to replace our refrigerator earlier this year. And it was so exciting because the refrigerator we had was just a piece of junk. And we haven't had ice in our house for multiple years. And here we finally get this new thing. And right when the refrigerator comes, I still like it, but it makes a louder noise than I expected. And I read and read and read, and nobody ever mentioned that. But that's still something that stands out where maybe I'm a little dissatisfied. There's always a ping of regret. With investing, regret is so easy to measure because the numbers are right there. And you could see what could have been if you had only invested this way or that way. That's fine to feel that way. That's actually normal. You're trying to make decisions that will minimize regret. And then when you do feel that regret, trying to be honest with yourself of what did I actually know at the time of the decision, truly? And those are when you talk about managing $7 billion as opposed to just one personal portfolio, those are the conversations that really come into play and probably end up generating some more complexities than you might find with my one fund portfolio.
Speaking of slow decision-making process, how painful was that to finally sell your Nike stock? And, setting aside performance and kind of where it was headed or where you thought it was headed, the emotional impact of that decision, how did that play out?
Well, to take a few steps back, the Nike stock was a gift from my grandmother on my 12th birthday. And it's what I usually assign as the moment in which I started building an education that turned into an interest that then turned honestly into an obsession with stocks, just broadly speaking. And Nike did absurdly well from the point in time it was gifted to me up until the point in time where I actually donated the final set of shares. And I started out my career as more of an individual stock analyst. And I feel like I did a pretty good job. As I kept learning, I kept starting to think, well, maybe I'm doing a good job because I'm getting lucky. Maybe there's some skill involved, but ultimately individual stocks, the probabilities in which any given stock is going to experience a catastrophic loss is enormous. There's actually a study that JP Morgan put out. I'm happy to share a link with you for the show notes. They look at all of the Russell 3000 companies since 1980. Roughly 40% of all stocks have suffered a permanent 70% decline from their peak value. Other things that you see is like 2/3 of all stocks underperform the Russell 3000 over their lifetime. The median return of a stock versus the Russell 3000 is minus 54%. So like the median stock did 54% worse than the Russell 3000. These are stats that I didn't have when I started to think maybe this is luck. It was more like me learning about theory and learning about who you're really competing with when you trade. And I did have an emotional attachment to a number of the individual stocks I owned, Nike being the biggest. And I know when I went to PlanCorp, I decided I am not going to own any more individual stocks because, again, I know I feel emotional about it. And mostly I had been gifting them away to charity. That way, the capital gains I had realized over the years don't actually get taxed. I just get to write off as a tax deduction for the charity. Keep the individual stock, they probably will sell it. They won't keep it, most likely. Most charities get it, sell it, take the cash, fund their programs. It was tough, though. I had already moved on mentally. The harder part actually was 2020 is the first time that I felt like I really wanted to buy a couple individual stocks because during the pandemic, really interesting opportunities come from crisis. The US markets were down more than 30% in a month, and there were a couple companies that were being priced like they were going out of business. That was the hardest time, honestly, to stick with the I'm not doing individual stocks piece. And that has been why writing down what my investment plan is so important. Yes, it's public, but even when you work with a financial advisor, you write down a plan and you try not to deviate from that plan. And no financial plan should require that an investment goes absolutely bonkers for your life to work out. And so I think in general, the last slug of Nike selling was tough. It's an attachment to my grandparents. It's an attachment to a sense of education. And I see that with people who get equity compensation at their companies. They have an attachment to the company, or stocks that they inherited from a grandparent or a parent or similar to me have just held forever. That emotional attachment is real. There are plenty of behavioral finance studies that show, they call it the endowment effect, that you assign a greater value to something you already own than you would otherwise. And so, for example, Even when I was donating that last bit of Nike, I asked myself, if I had cash today, would I go buy Nike stock? And the answer is no. I'd already decided that the probabilities of any given stock doing better than owning a very broadly diversified, low-cost portfolio, the odds of an individual stock doing better are just not really realistic to be anchoring your wealth to. I got to be clear though, Justin, a lot of people who like individual stocks, like we work with clients who carve out a small piece and they use it to express themselves. They like it as a hobby. I have no problem with that. And honestly, if you know that about yourself, it's almost better to do it that way, where you have, say, less than 5% of your money in a portfolio where you're trading. Yes, you may be a long-term investor, but ultimately you're trading and you're making bets. And then the other portion of your wealth is left uninterrupted, because the key to because the key to investment success is really just minimizing mistakes and trying not to interrupt compound interest. And individual stocks introduce too many opportunities for that. Plus the probabilities just are working against you.
Yeah, and I see it as fine as well. If that keeps you excited about investing and it's a portion, it doesn't have to be a small portion, but at least a predetermined portion of your portfolio. If you're saving and investing money into, long-term investments, like even if you're doing some trading with that, you're probably ahead of most people in all honesty. Like if it's even 50% of your portfolio and the other 50% is from a very diversified, low-cost strategy, got to guess that you're still probably ahead of 90% of people that are out there.
Yeah, I'm with you. You learn a lot from the individual stock investing. There's like a thought experiment that says, like, how much are you willing to pay to learn that you're not good at stock trading? And the answer is different for everybody. It's however much you lost relative to the overall market before you made that choice. And it's true to some extent, and hopefully you get lucky. And again, I'm not trying to shame people from doing it. I think if you are interested in it, you need the right framework for thinking about why you're doing it. Then it's a totally different thing. If it's about growing your wealth at a rate greater than inflation without taking undue risk, no, it's not going to fall in that bucket. That's what investing is all about. And if you hit a home run, yes, that would be great. How would that change your life when you're putting small amounts of money in? The only way for it to change your life is to put an irresponsible amount of money in. And, that's just a recipe for disaster.
I know you said you didn't want to get into the details, but I'm curious, what led you to making the decision whenever you hit 50 years old, you're going to add, I believe it's 30% bonds to your portfolio?
It was just random. I think in general, there's real risks in the few years leading up to retirement, especially the first few years of retirement when you're drawing on your portfolio, that if the market is down that first year or two that you're in retirement, you're permanently impairing the growth potential of your portfolio. And so trying to reduce some of the volatility there makes some sense. On the other hand, I don't have any taxable investments other than the business that I partially own with my partners, which is Plan Corp. And in that investment that I talk about in the ebook that we're referencing at howpeterinvests.com, that investment dwarfs my retirement portfolio right now. Mm-hmm. And so it could be that I get to 50 and say, I actually don't really need bonds. Your mix of stocks and bonds is really dependent on your ability to tolerate risk and your willingness to tolerate risk. And ability is pretty objective. It's stuff like time horizon, liquidity needs. Willingness is pretty subjective. Like, I know that I'm very willing to deal with losing 60% of my money. If you were invested going into 2007, down to the bottom in 2009, the S&P 500 lost about 60%. Mm-hmm. So that's a big, big loss. The pandemic was scary for very different reasons. 2022 is kind of like this routine ho-hum bear market. I wish they were all that way. But ultimately, for me, I feel like I should probably take some of the volatility out. That 70-30 mix is probably the thing I hesitate the most on as a decision that was made, let's say, 9 years ago at this point. It still seems right. And I think my fear is if I don't stick to it, there needs to be a really good reason why. It's fine to change your mind over time, but you want to try to change your mind using facts, not feelings. And so I think right now I am feeling like I might want to change the plan, but as it gets closer and some of the facts about my situation are clear, perhaps that'll change.
You still have a decade plus to make that decision, but what would be some of the facts that would to lead to that? Is it simply you're at Plan Corp, you have no end in sight in terms of leaving there, you have plenty of money coming in, you're not going to be drawing down on your retirement assets anytime soon, so you can continue to leave them in an all stock portfolio, or are there some other facts that you might be considering or might impact that decision?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think the biggest one would be what I project my liquidity needs to be relative to the size of the portfolio. And not necessarily at age 50, but at age whatever it is when I retire. I used to think I for sure was working till my 70s. I think that might still be true, but I'm not as gung-ho about it as I was a decade ago. I would say that if it feels like I have more than enough money to support my needs given a big market downturn, then I might as well just stay more aggressive. It's not that different than when we have people hit their 70th or 80th birthday and they're in a moderate sort of portfolio for a retiree where we say, hey, a lot of this money is actually for your kids. And so the portfolio should reflect their time horizon. And so I feel like when you're 80 is when you arguably, if you have plenty of money, you should go back to being 100% stocks. You don't need the money anymore. You might as well have it match the horizon of who is using it. So I think those are some of the things that would go through my mind in about a decade. I turned 40 in December. And so, I'll have a decade to sort this out. The other thing, and it's in the ebook that we reference is, I think it's in there, is if we're in the middle of a recession, I'm not going to add bonds. Like I'm not going to sell my stocks while we're in a bear market. That's, the opposite of what you want to do. There's really no hurry, but I do feel like 100% stocks is something that I have never, ever, ever recommended to anybody. Only you yourself can know that you can stick with it. And people I know really, really closely, there's maybe less than a handful of people that I feel like I know well enough to say they could or couldn't handle it. For me, it's just there's so much familiarity with the market. I don't even look at my portfolio, honestly. I look at the value just to fill out a net worth statement once or twice a year. Beyond that, when the market is down a lot, I'm just really busy. I'm talking to clients, I'm doing podcasts and TV and articles. And maybe as I get older and I'm less busy, if that's a thing, I will have more time to look at my portfolio. And that is the challenge, I think. So obviously our audience is not retirees that we're talking to today, but I'll tell those of you in the audience, I work with a lot of retirees who don't have as much to do. And as a result, they focus way too much on their portfolio. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you are grinding, you are trying to earn more. And you just got to make sure that you get your savings on the right track and set up and your investments set up in a place so that you don't have to worry about it. And if there's a big downturn, you'll be too busy with kids or career or something else to even notice. And that's great. There's been all sorts of studies. I think the most famous one, or at least the initial one, was from Fidelity that looked at all of their accounts history and found that the best performing ones are the accounts that were either forgotten about or the person named was dead. And so that just goes to show you, if you leave it alone, financial theory tends to work pretty well in the long run. The challenge is that the long run in the moment feels like an eternity. And so it's trying to kind of connect those dots between today and the future and all stuff that comes up regularly. But kind of going back to where the conversation started, the more you simplify it, the less you have to keep track of. And the more you can say, I know I made a good choice. I can just stay the course and let things play out as they're going to.
Let's change course, actually, and kind of move off of investing and maybe chat about a few other money topics that I want to explore simplicity versus difficulty with. And one thing that comes up often for me is budgeting. It's either somebody really loves budgeting, they track every single dollar. Every Friday they sit down and they plug it into their spreadsheet. Or I get the opposite camps that are like, I absolutely hate budgeting. I'm never going to make a spreadsheet. I'm never going to input all of my expenses. I don't want to follow something. I don't want to restrict my spending in that way. So I want to speak to the latter audience here. And a topic that I don't believe we've really covered in any kind of detail on the show is reverse budgeting. Can you explain what this is and how it works and how this might be applicable to that last group?
Reverse budgeting is by far the most important financial decision or set of decisions that I have ever made. And at the beginning of the show, you had mentioned how like sometimes 80% of the output comes from 20% of the work. And really reverse budgeting flips the whole process on your head, where when you're budgeting, you have to track each expense, and it sort of forces you to make every decision as if you live in a spreadsheet. But we don't live in a spreadsheet. And rather than focusing on the expenses, I think it's better to focus on the savings. That's what reverse budgeting is all about. You simply figure out how much you need to save. You make those savings automatic, and then you just spend the rest the way you please. Now, if you overspend, this isn't for you. But knowing exactly what you're saving gives you a lot of control. And when you increase the amount you save, naturally that reduces the amount you spend. But if I were budgeting, let's say, $250 on eating out, and we run out of that in week 3 of the month, and my wife and I get invited to somebody's birthday party, and we're not going to not go because we had this budget line, especially if we see that the money is there. The one benefit that everybody has today that I didn't necessarily have when I didn't come up with the term reverse budgeting. I don't know where it came from, and I can't seem to remember who ever did it. But back then you had to use a spreadsheet. Mint.com was just coming out. Of course, now Mint has gone away, but there are all these budgeting apps that sort of let you do this. When you're reverse budgeting, though, basically the way I like to think about it is if you write down all your financial goals for the next 5 years. So let's say in the next 5 years, I want to max out my 401k. I want to pay down an auto loan. I want to go on a vacation to Europe, and I want to increase the size of my emergency fund. And so maxing out your retirement account, that's a annual goal. You might think that's a long-term goal, but it's short-term. That's a 12-month goal. And you do that 5 different years. So you basically total up all the expenses, divide by 60, because there's 60 months in 5 years. And now you know what you need to save every month. And if you don't have that amount to save every month, okay, time to reorder the priorities. I'm a big believer that you have to prioritize retirement savings and some sort of cash reserve. Doesn't mean it's above anything and everything, but you have to do something towards those. In large part because compounding's so powerful. The best thing you can do for your retirement is to start early. And then generally speaking, the bigger your savings rate over time, the more mistakes you can make along the way. A good savings rate is going to eliminate all sorts of bad choices, but it also allows you opportunities in the future. For example, a lot of people will ask me, how do I save for having a kid? And the answer is you don't, because nobody knows what a kid costs. A kid costs whatever your income is. That's what your kid is going to cost. But here's the thing is if you were saving 25% of your income prior to having children, well, then maybe you're only going to save 15% of your income post-children. But you know what? You had money in there compounding earlier, and that 15% is still something. And oh, by the way, now you can afford this human life you brought into the world. That to me is a better framework than trying to create some sort of baby bucket of savings account. Similarly, a really common thing that comes up for people in their 30s is buying a second house. Not owning 2 houses at once, but like going to a bigger or newer or different city, different house, second house. And you're looking at mortgage payments and you're trying to figure out, can I really afford this? The most common thing, you get a bigger house, it costs a little bit more. You know if you can or can't because you have this reverse budget with the planned savings. And so, yes, you are maybe saving a little bit less. And in a perfect world, yes, you would earn more and more and more, and you would never save less. But ultimately, as your income grows, you may not actually save less dollars. It's just that the percentage of which you're saving is going to shrink. All a long-winded way of saying that the reverse budgeting piece, you don't have to judge yourself. You can. I judge myself all the time for my expenses. But in general, it reduces the amount of time you spend thinking on it, and it simplifies it. Again, it goes back to the simplification piece. My book, Making Money Simple, honestly was born out of the reverse budget. I felt like it isn't that difficult to have financial success. It's certainly not magic. It's more a matter of engineering. And the real challenge is that in life, relative to school, like in school, you learn the lesson, you take the test. In life with money, you get the test first, and then you learn the money lesson. And so how can we set up some of this stuff to make it so that you are more likely to be successful and you can make mistakes along the way without it completely derailing your progress?
Well said. Yeah. So just to recap and to make sure that I understand reverse budgeting right, give some foresight. Next 5 years, here's all my big goals. I want to invest $30,000 into my retirement accounts. I want to save $15,000 for my upcoming wedding, or maybe it's a down payment, whatever it may be. And I have $15,000 of student loans that I want to pay off. Add those all up, 60 grand, 60 months over the course of the 5 years, comes out to $1,000 a month. I'm bringing in $5,000 every single month. So I'm allocating $1,000 of that $5,000 to go towards these buckets. the remaining 4,000 is really now my budget, how much I can spend on both discretionary and indiscretionary spending throughout the month. Do I have that right?
You nailed it. You could have come up with it yourself with that explanation. That's beautiful.
I really like that. And I think it would make sense for a lot of people that don't necessarily want to break out spending into each of these line items. Like you gave that example, I had $250 a month for food and drink. And then I get this amazing invite to go and hang out with a friend for my birthday. And I look at my budget and I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm at $260. I got to say no. But then I'm looking over at shopping or clothes or whatever line item, and you're 0 out of 200 for the month. I think it makes logical sense to be able to shift that money over, but some people can't process it that way or need to follow the rigidness of this budget versus the reverse budget kind of collapses all of your line items together in one, and you need to make sure you're taking care of the bills, the routine bills and everything. And there's still got to be this pot of money left for all of this discretionary spending up to you. And you should be allowed to spend it in different capacities depending on what that month is calling for.
Yeah, all you have to pay attention to is that your checking account is roughly the same as your credit card balances. Make sure that your credit cards are paying every month. And it can be really easy. And I think in general, if there's an activity that will help you, that you have to make the choice to do it every day, there's a risk that you won't do it. And, to track your budget every day, you have to really do it every day. Even if you're using an app, you often have to categorize expenses every day. Now, I love logging into the budgeting apps. It's a way for me just to see what transactions happen. I feel like it'd be very hard to steal my credit card and get away with a lot of expenses without me noticing. And I'm sort of like the same kid who had a lot of cash jobs growing up as a waiter, as a car washer, as a junior high basketball referee, where there are cash jobs. I'd take my cash home and I'd stack it and count it in my bedroom. It's sort of the adult version of that, I'm sure. The reverse budgeting, though, one thing I never think about is, am I off track? Because I've done this planning to know that this is what I need to save for those goals. And it's totally within my control. And that feels really empowering to then free yourself up to think about other things.
So as we're concluding this conversation, I want to end on one final thread. And Peter, I think I'm going to challenge you because this is something that I've been really challenged with lately as well. So there was an important lesson that you learned from a jukebox, and it might go hand in hand with spending and the budgeting that we were just talking about. But then I was also listening to you on a podcast. I believe it was What You Are Made Of podcast. And the host asked you, what's the biggest mistake that you've made with money? And your response back to that was not enjoying it enough. So kind of taking the jukebox story along with that response there, how do you really think through what's important whenever it comes to spending money and how you utilize your money?
Such a great question. So the jukebox story is my first real distinct money memory. There's a place in St. Louis called Cafe Manhattan that we used to go to pretty regularly. Pizza place, classic St. Louis thin crust pizza. There's a jukebox there, and I remember wanting to play a song, and we were playing a game with coins on the table anyways, where while we're waiting for the pizza, which by the way, always takes forever, still takes forever. It is really good, but goodness gracious, it's slow. And so quarters are in front of me on the table. We are playing with them. And I say, Dad, can I have a quarter to go play a song on the jukebox? And he goes, well, is it worth your money? I was like, no. And then he goes, well, then it's not worth mine. I was like, oh, darn it. And we went to this place a lot where the next time we were there, still playing this coin hockey game on the table and thinking I've smartened up. I asked for a quarter for the jukebox. He says, is it worth your money? And I go, yeah. He goes, great, go spend your own. And I was like, oh, darn it, I got beat again. This is why us adults are always smarter than our children. And I never had a formal money education. And parents are sort of the first line of defense there. I think sometimes people point to the schools as who should be teaching about money. It's really the parents. And you just be honest with your kids and explain, mistakes and opportunities and how you think through things. And that's going to be what they pick up. Now, my parents, I guess, were frugal. They were cheap. I think frugal is a better word than cheap. They never spent something that they didn't have. I would say that I am definitely frugal and borderline cheap. As I have grown older, I would say that the purse strings have loosened. Dying with the biggest bank account possible isn't going to generate you that much on your deathbed. I have worked with enough people end of life, and I feel like the wealthiest of people have never said, oh, look at how much money my kids are going to inherit, or look at how big my bank account is. Usually they're like, I got to spend this money. I got to enjoy life. I think there's a really healthy balance. Actually, last night I was meeting with a young couple. One's a physician, one's a veterinarian. And they're talking about doing a kitchen renovation. And it was $50,000 and they're not quite doing their savings goal, but like the income is, they're pretty high income couple. And it's sort of like, okay, so this kitchen remodel that's $50,000, if we took all that money, the husband goes, if we just invested that, wouldn't that be better? And I go, well, yeah. So if we invested $50,000 today and it grew over the next 30 years, yes, you would have more money. Would you have enough money to retire early? Probably not. Would it change like what type of restaurants you go to? Probably not, for this couple, given their earnings profile and, what they've accumulated thus far. And yes, there's always a better math decision. When you spend money, it decreases your net worth. When you don't, it increases your net worth. It's a balance. The other challenge is that we think of our future selves like complete strangers. Great research that shows these neural scans of the brain activity when we think of our future selves, and it's giving money to our future selves, and it's truly identical to giving money to a stranger. And so like, how do we connect these two people so that current Peter doesn't suffer in the name of future Peter all the time, but similarly, future Peter doesn't suffer just so that current Peter can have a good time?
Yeah.
It's definitely a balance. Our identities change over time. Like, I think one of the things that's easy for any of us to do is to think of like how much we've grown up, how different we are than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And the real challenge is it's what they call the end of history illusion, where that's sort of, if we start setting goals, as we all have, we assume that our identity today is going to be the same as it will be in 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Like, we think we're done growing up, but you really never are done changing. And that really is difficult. And so I think to the best of your ability, knowing what makes you happy is helpful. There's a lot of research out there that shows what in aggregate tends to make people experience longer lasting happiness. It doesn't mean it works for everybody, but the big one that people latch on to the most is experiences. Yeah, I love traveling. I want to show my kids the world. I feel like our family spends more on travel than a lot of people around us, but we spend less on our house. Like the house, I get a lot of joy in our house. Having like the fanciest, newest kitchen, we don't entertain that much. It's not like I get to show off the house. It doesn't make me that happy. I'm sure if my wife were listening to this, she'd be like, it would make me happy though. That's fine. We do a balance, but it's sort of knowing what makes you happy and not starving yourself of those pleasures, because ultimately, as someone who's about to turn 40, and again, your audience is a little bit younger. So like, I'm sort of the older brother in this situation. Like, yeah, I'm at the point where I'm starting to be like, there's only X number of years left. Like, I'm about halfway through life, and I'm about halfway through my career, and there's only so much time left. And the kids, I'm about halfway done with my kids. They're not going to live here. And so like, I only get so many summer vacations with them. I only get to do things with them so many times. And that's sort of where I'm trying to connect the dots more. I am far from having it figured out though.
I really enjoy listening to my friends that are new parents, and I do think kids really put that perspective in. I can't remember the study, but it's like by the time your kid turns 18, you've spent like 85% of the time with them that you'll ever spend with them. And I think whenever you break that down and start looking at it from each summer's perspective, you're like, holy cow, like this might be a large portion of the time I get to spend with my kids. Why not maximize this vacation with them or go a place that we've always wanted to go? I do like that kids push us in that direction, and it's really nice. Peter, let's round things out here. You mentioned your guide. Is it howpeterinvest.com? People can go get the answer to the one mutual fund that you choose for your investments. You also got a book out there, Making Money Simple. Tell us a little bit about the book and where we can find the book.
Yeah, you can find Making Money Simple anywhere you buy books. But, this book, when it was written, was really aimed the audience of your show, Justin. And so one of the things I talked to you about beforehand, I have a link. It's peterlazaroff.com/free book. So you're going to have to figure out how to spell my last name, but you can probably figure it out through some good Googling, but peterlazaroff.com/free book. I will get you a copy of the book, Making Money Simple, for free. Right when we were talking about it, I kind of glanced back behind me, saying like, well, how many are over there? There's a couple dozen, so we should be good. And if I run out of supplies, I'll politely apologize to you via email. But, would love for anybody to also go purchase. And if you enjoy it, share it with somebody. You don't have to keep it forever. I try to give away as much of the information I have for free via the website or via my podcast, The Long-Term Investor. So most of what you find in the book, you can eventually find throughout aggregating everything else in one place or another.
I love it. Once again, that's peterlazaroff.com/free book. You can either look at the show title to figure out how to spell Lazaroff, or you can just open up the show notes and click that link. We'll have it right there at the top. Peter, final question for you. If you had the opportunity to teach a 16-week class to a group of graduating college seniors on a topic that isn't normally covered in the classroom, what would you teach and how would you teach it?
So I'm going to cheat a little because I do teach one class to outgoing college seniors every semester. Some people in the fall aren't always outgoing until the spring, but once a semester do this class. And it's really just about where to save for retirement, like where do the first dollars go, and trying to alert them to make some of these choices that we're talking about today. Like the reverse budgeting piece is just so important. And making sure that you're saving into your company's retirement plan is priceless. I tell people all the time, your company's probably offering you a match. So if you're making $100,000 and they offer you a 3% match, you got to put 3% of your salary in there because you're going to double your money for free. It is literally the only guaranteed doubling of your money in your entire life, and it's part of your compensation. And if you can afford it, max out your 401k. Like that is the thing. I tell people that in high school. People will have me in and talk to high school seniors, and I know they're going to forget everything. And so I can't tell you how many times in a 30-minute or 1 hour talk I will say, and don't forget to max out your 401k, the most important thing. And, when I think about if it's a 16-week class rather than the 2 to 3 hour class that I'm doing once a semester for outgoing seniors, I might go into more of like, okay, here are the choices you make when you get to your employer with regards to a retirement plan. Where does the next dollar go? Well, the next dollar probably goes to a health savings account if you have a high deductible plan, and if using a high deductible plan is a good thing for you. Talking about getting into a Roth IRA. Before you're investing taxable dollars, a lot of the decision has to do with your debt. And that's probably a part of the 16-week course where it's figuring out like, where do the debt goals figure into this? A lot of people graduate with student debt. A lot of people have business loans, auto loans, mortgages, et cetera. I think that to me would be what is most helpful. And something that I said today is something I say all the time, that a good savings rate and maxing out your 401k, that can cover up a lot of poor choices that you make after the fact. It will definitely gloss over some stuff and give you some wiggle room to make mistakes, and also put you on the fast track for financial success.
I was just doing this calculation yesterday, actually prepping for a talk that I'm about to give. And I was doing some calculations, and $300 a month, that's $3,600 a year, starting at the age of 25, finishing at the age of 65, I used 8% as a return rate. You're going to be over $1 million. So I broke it down, and I'm planning on telling them this as well. Half of that could come from your employer. Like you could be putting in $150 through your 401k, getting the match from your employer, and set yourself up for pretty good success, just kind of hitting that low benchmark to start with. And as your income grows and as you get more and more interested in saving for your future and investing for your future, you can continue to increase that. So I think it's a great idea. It's a great reminder, very helpful course. Once again, this is Peter Lazaroff, author of Making Money Simple and host of The Long-Term Investor. Peter, it's been a blast. Thanks for coming on.
Justin, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the episode. As always, I appreciate your kind words. If you want to leave us a rating and review on your podcast player right now, that would absolutely make my day. If you want to find episode show notes, our blog, and other great resources, head over to tsirpodcast.com. If you have follow-up questions, an idea for a future episode, or just want to say hi, we have a contact form on our website, and those messages go straight into my inbox, and I promise you, I will reply. But all right, guys, I really appreciate you tuning in. I love you all, and you're not alone. Let's keep making it through our struggles together.